In-depth journalism in the Memphis community, the Daily Memphian is of Memphis, not just in Memphis, and seeks to tell the stories of this city. TheDailyMemphian.com. Truth in place.
Hi, everyone, and welcome to the Daily Memphian Tigers podcast with myself, Greg Gaston, and the whole gang is back together. We got Frank Bonner, Tigers football beat writer for the Daily Memphian. Parth Upadhyaya will join us in a little bit, the Tigers basketball beat writer for the Daily Memphian. And Tim Buckley is back with us, the Daily Memphian deputy sports editor and senior writer. Let me start with Frank. Frank, another crazy Tigers football finish as they pull one out against Charlotte, 44-38 in overtime. They continue to walk that fine line between disaster and joy. There are a lot of people that still think it should be style points included, but the bottom line is this team is 8-2. They're 5-1 in conference play as they get ready for the big one Saturday against SMU. Your thoughts on their performance and their comeback win?
Yeah, right. I mean, to your point, you just have to win the games that are in front of you, and no matter what it looks like, did you score more points than the other team? Now, obviously, there are things about each game that you could say are concerning, right? The defense giving up as many yards and points as it has in these last four games or whatever. But then on the other end, the defense forced 4 takeaways, had some key stops at the end of the game. And so Memphis is making the plays that they need to make down the stretch in order to get the W, no matter what happens, in the other, 3 quarters or whatever the case may be. And all is well as long as you keep winning. Nobody's going to harp on some of the negatives that happen in the game if you continue to rack up W's, which is what Memphis has done. And so you have to tip your hat off to the coaching staff and to those players to find ways to win ball games.
Before we continue to look at the Charlotte game and prepare for the SMU game, Mr. Bonner has a bone to pick with you, Mr. Buckley.
Oh, yeah. So anybody who
big shock.
Anybody who has read Tim Buckley's column that he wrote yesterday, a great column, but I just want to point out the fact that Tim Buckley has changed his stance on the biggest game of the year. If you listened to the podcast a few weeks ago heading into the Tulane game, you remember Tim Buckley was giving me crap about not saying that Tulane was the biggest game of Ryan Silverfield's tenure for reasons that I outlined. Well, it sounds like Tim Buckley has come around and have agreed with me in stating now that he thinks the SMU game is the biggest game of the year and Tulane is off of the docket. Tim Buckley, can you please touch on that for us a little bit?
Well, first of all, according to Frank Bonner, the leader of the gang that can't shoot straight, he doesn't understand that every game is the biggest game in program history. He didn't read through the entire column. Like literally, today is the biggest practice in Tigers history. So it doesn't matter whether I say it's a Tulane game or it's the SMU game, or you say it's a Tulane game and the SMU game. It's every game. You have to remember that. And second of all, Calkins started all this biggest game in history. So, I'll either go with or refute what he says, depending on which way the wind's blowing.
So he's giving us coach speak now. He's giving us before he was straight and narrow. Now he's giving us the coach speak.
Now, that is not beneath me, Frank. Trust me.
Hopefully I won't have to get in between you guys. I don't have to worry about today because Tim is joining us from parts unknown, just like his old wrestling friends. Tim, does it matter how they win? Isn't it only if they win? Or do style points count? It seems like it does with part of the fan base.
How did SMU do against Memphis, let's say, 2 years ago? Yeah, you don't remember. See, point proven. It doesn't matter how they win. If I didn't get an immediate response, you don't remember. Nobody's going to remember how they won against Charlotte at this point next year, especially if they go into the championship game with only 2 regular season losses. All they're going to look at is the overall win-loss record. Style points in college football do not matter.
They may matter for the playoff committee.
Diving, especially from the Russian judge, they matter.
I hear you. And it may matter for the playoff selection committee, but I agree with you 100%. And I couldn't remember the game you were referring to because I can't remember what I had for dinner last night. However, there are people that have made up their mind, Frank Bonner, that Ryan Silverfield's not the right guy for the job. I don't even know if a win on Saturday changes their mind. It is hard to change their point of view about who the coach is of the Tigers.
Yeah, but I mean, here's the thing, right? There's always going to be a pocket of a fan base that wants a coach out. There's probably a small pocket of Alabama fans who are griping about Nick Saban or for whatever reason, right? The reality of it is that they don't control whether what happens to Ryan or right. Ryan Silverfield needs to please the administration. And right now, an 8-2 record, I think, is pleasing them pretty well right now, especially if you beat SMU this weekend. And so at the end of the day, that's what matters.
You're right about that, unless it's a booster that is spending millions of dollars. And we saw that earlier in the week, did we not, Tim, with Texas A&M and some other schools? But that's not the case here at Memphis.
Yeah, and Mississippi State as well. But look, Ryan could be 10-0 right now. Haters are going to hate. That's just the way it is. And for the record, toasted ravioli with beef and cheese, a little marinara sauce, some Rebel, almost sugar-free ice cream with crushed cashews, proving I can remember what I had for dinner last night, so I clearly am the more sane between you and I.
Well, I am very jealous of that meal that you had last night. I'm not sure about you, Frank, but it sounds good to me.
Yeah, well, he's the hot shot coming off.
He lives the high life, doesn't he?
Yeah, right. So that's Tim Buckley for you.
Okay, so last week in the win at Charlotte, they come back from 10 down with 7 minutes to play. They pull the thing out. Seth Hennigan, who again during the game gets hurt, leaves the game. Tevin Carter, this time his one throw is an interception as opposed to a touchdown against South Florida. Seth battles his way back into the game, ends up being the American Conference Offensive Player of the Week with that performance. He wasn't alone. They got a lot of great efforts. They did certainly from Blake Watson, especially in that overtime period with that touchdown run. But that was another heroic game, heroic win from Seth Hennigan, who has been doing it all season long.
Yeah, I mean, if you want to sit here and talk about why you believe that Memphis has a chance to beat SMU, I think it starts with Seth, right? Earlier in the year, we had conversation about, is he taking the next step? I know he had some interceptions, whatever. These last 4 games or so, Seth has been on the money. I mean, he's steered the ship and allowed them to get out of some sticky situations in some of these close games. And he's shown that he can be consistent in that. And if he can play this Saturday like he has been the last 4 weeks, Memphis is going to have a chance to win the ball game late.
The motto has been since spring football and into camp in August and now into the season, finish. Finish what you started. Last year, Tim, they weren't able to finish some of those games, and it came back to haunt them. So far this year, with the exception of that Tulane game where they had a 2-score lead and lost, they have polished off the teams they are expected to polish off. There has been certainly scary moments like last week against North Texas as well, but they are finishing, and that's what you're supposed to do.
Yeah, again, the style points don't matter. They almost didn't finish against Charlotte, but they pulled it out. And again, people aren't going to remember. Going back on Seth Hennigan, I kind of got like the appetizer version of him when I came in kind of in the middle of the season, making the move from Louisiana to Memphis. I'm getting more of the fuller version now, and bringing back the style points issue. Look, he's not the most athletic quarterback in college football. He doesn't have the best arm in college football. He isn't the best runner in college football. He maybe isn't even, one of the best decision makers always in college football. The kid's a gamer. He gets it done. He gutted that one through. You could tell he was playing hurt, maybe even playing injured as well. And there's a difference. But when he saw when he put that left hand down, you could tell it like just racked his shoulder. And then all of a sudden there's the Tevin Carter interception, and they showed his face. Seth Hennigan's on the sideline, and it was just a look of, I don't care how I feel like, I'm going to come and get this done. And that's the face of a gamer.
So they get ready to play a huge game against SMU. You win that game, you have a great chance to get to the conference championship. You don't certainly control your own destiny because you will need Tulane to eventually beat UTSA, but you're in a great position. You lose this game, you are out of the race. The question is, can that Memphis defense, which has been certainly most of the time struggle, it's been a struggle out there, yet they still are able at times to make big plays. They got that big third down stop on a drive by Charlotte late in that game after the Tigers had scored a touchdown to allow Memphis to get the football back and kick Tanner Gillis the tying field goal to send it to overtime. They finally got a stop, got that Charlotte offense off the field. They had 4 interceptions. One was a pick 6. But the rest of the time, they were getting mowed over by a 5th-string running back. And that has been a recurring theme, Frank, as far as this defense is concerned. This isn't a bend, don't break. They've broken a lot of times, and now they're going to face one of the most potent offenses in the entire country.
Yeah, I mean, that's the wild card in this entire matchup, I think, is that Memphis defense, because you don't know if they're going to be able to make enough stops early in the game to where it can be close in the fourth quarter, right? Memphis, the offense has shown that it can keep up with some high scoring, but at the end of the day, you got to make a stop at some point to keep it close. Now, if it is close going into the fourth quarter, somehow that defense has shown that, like you said, it can make stops late no matter what has happened. And I think one thing that is in Memphis's favor is if you look at the SMU games, all of their wins except for the one against Rice have been major blowouts. Memphis, on the other hand, has lived in close games. If the game is close in the fourth quarter, at home for Memphis, I think the Tigers will feel more comfortable in that moment than SMU because SMU hasn't had to do that a lot this year.
SMU is 10th in offensive efficiency. They're 11th in defensive efficiency. The defensive efficiency is something that concerns me, Tim, as the Memphis offense has been clicking all season long, but now they go up against a formidable defense. It seems like to win this game, it's going to be one of those shootouts and you just maybe need the football on the last possession of the game, you score and you win. But easier said than done against SMU.
Yeah, and look, I don't know what the over-under is, but whatever it is, I'd probably take the over because SMU's gonna pour it on, which is why it's imperative that that Hennigan be at his best, even if he's not at his healthiest, he be at his best. That Blake Watson not fumble the football every time he gets within like 10 yards of the end zone. That receivers other than Rock Taylor step up and deliver, and that frankly there be no guffaws on special teams, especially when it comes to missed field goals within reasonable range. So you got to have a lot come together if you're going to have a defense that's given up points, which based on the last few weeks seems likelier than not to happen.
Yeah, those are big issues. You brought up important issues. I want to address a few of them here as we move along. But I did want to bring up the fact that Memphis, it's rare that they are a home underdog. And they are a home underdog as we tape this podcast by more than a touchdown. 8.5. It opened at 6. It's now 8.5 points. So obviously the wise guys, as they say, Frank, out in the desert, like SMU in a big way over Memphis, who has been terrific at home for the most part over the last, 8 years?
Yeah, and if you're looking at the odds makers, right, and everything that goes into that and the numbers and however they accumulate those spreads, you really can't blame them for putting SMU at over a touchdown point favorite because just look at the games that SMU has played and you look at the games that Memphis has played against some similar opponents. SMU are kind of blowing them out the water. So I get the logic behind the 8.5 point favorite or whatever it is. But if you look at this Memphis program closely, and if you look at Ryan's entire tenure while coaching Memphis hardly ever plays in a lot of blowout games one way or the other. And so on that side, you expect Memphis to be in a close game whether they win or lose.
And for the record, if I may add, I can neither confirm nor deny the existence of wise guys in the desert, even after having returned from a.
That's what I've heard, Tim. I don't know either. Yeah, that's a little surprising, though. I think 8.5. I was a little surprised by that. I thought it would probably be a touchdown, maybe under a touchdown, and it did start at 6. So again, this is what now the bettors are doing to make that line go to 8.5. All right, before we get some thoughts on what you think will happen in this game and the repercussions of this game, Tim brought up a couple of things. Blake Watson, who has been absolutely tremendous, unfortunately has had a few of these key fumbles at the goal line for some reason, and I know that Coach Silverfield addressed it after the game.
Yeah, I mean he was obviously frustrated. I think the quote was, he said, "I'm tired of making excuses for the young man." I think is what he said. And then he said, he's put us in some tough situations. Blake Watson he's been a special player for Memphis this entire season, the best playmaker they have on offense. But fumbling at the goal line is a big deal. I mean, when you get that close to the goal line, that fumble is essentially taking 7 points off of the board. And so I don't think it's a coincidence that all of a sudden a guy like Brandon Thomas, who we didn't see playing a whole lot at the beginning of the year, they start going to him in those goal line situations and short yardage situations because they trust him not to fumble the ball. And so I think that's offensive coordinator Tim Cramsey was asked about that today during his press conference, and he said that he didn't say much, but he said we have a plan on how we're going to handle our situational running backs or so on or something like that. And so I think what it is that you let Blake Watson do what he does during the drive, and then once you get closer to the goal line, if assuming that Brandon Thomas is going to be healthy, you go to Brandon Thomas, and if that's what it takes to finish the drive, then it'll that's what it takes.
It's interesting.
As frustrating as that has to be, Greg, for Silverfield and for Cramsey, it's hard to knock Watson. I mean, if it wasn't for the fact that Seth Hennigan is around, Blake Watson is basically the Kendrick Davis of Memphis football as far as one and dones go. I mean, he's been huge for them.
They haven't had that stud running back the last few years. They have that stud running back now. He's been absolutely tremendous. From my point of view, I'm with you guys. It's tough. Now, we're not coaches. We're not fellow players. We're not even fans. We cover the team. But I can't criticize the guy. Yeah, it's got to be frustrating to fumble it a few times like he has right at the goal line and turn it over to the other team. But, man, where would they be without that guy? Now, you bring up a good point, too, Frank, about Brandon Thomas. He gets hurt in the game against Charlotte. He's on the sideline in a sling. I'm thinking to myself, wow, this might be detrimental for the rest of the year. But then Ryan, in his Monday presser, said that everybody's day-to-day and didn't say that Thomas is out for the year. And I don't know, again, if that's gamesmanship. He tries to be transparent. He's not always transparent. I think he believes he thinks he's transparent all the time. But that is a critical player. He's become a critical player because you're right. Down in the goal line situations, he's a physical running back. Not that Watson doesn't, stick his nose in there and get physical, but that's the guy they've become accustomed to giving the ball to. So we'll see if he's going to be out. Blankensee, you mentioned Tim. Rock Taylor's the one guy that's been consistent as far as the receivers. The others have been pretty inconsistent. They've had their moments, Skates and Dove and Blankensee. Blankensee got hurt on a great effort making a catch that was out of bounds, Frank. But it looks like, again, according to the coach, he's day-to-day. He may be able to go as well.
But Blankensee's day-to-day.
We're all day-to-day.
Blankensee's day-to-day was a little bit more informative than the usual one because he did make the comment that the doctors cleared him in the locker room, and he said if the doctors continue to clear him, then he should be good to go. That's a little bit more informative than the usual day-to-day that we get from Ryan Silverfield. So I do think that is a positive sign that Blankensee might be able to go.
Frank,
so now there are gradations of day-to-day. I love it.
Well, I mean, that's where we're at. I mean, we've got to try to read between the lines and break down the different day-to-days that we get every week.
It's hour to hour. It's not day-to-day.
Oh, my gosh. It drives me batty. And on the sidelines for our radio broadcasts, I don't want to give an opinion of an injury, but I will tell everybody what I'm actually seeing, what they're working on. If I see that, I'm not going to guess as to, oh, this guy's definitely got a broken ankle or he has a broken forearm or something like that. But I can tell you that he was in a sling after the game. Now, probably just for protection, but if it's a sling, I mean, that worries me a little bit. So we'll see. We'll see on Saturday when they come out.
And for the record, if I can go on a mini rant, I mean, not a Taylor Jenkins-esque rant, but a mini rant. Enough with this. We're not going to tell you who's going to start a quarterback until he runs out on the field stuff. They know who it's going to be. They know who it's not going to be. Nobody's going to change their game plan because you learn 2 hours before the start of the game based on who it's going to be. They tell the people in the television booth anyway, just come out and tell us. The kid's going to play. He's not going to play. He's going to start. We'll see how it goes, whatever. Just be honest and knock it off with the nonsense because that's only been going on for the last 10 years. And now I'm finally tired of it.
Should college football overall, I know the Big Ten does it now, should college football, every conference, have a Friday football injury report?
Yes, if you're gonna allow betting on these games, which is all that college football has become.
Yeah, I'll say before I answer the question, I will say that I think the reason why Ryan is the way he is because he probably feels like he got burned a little bit. Against UAB, against Charlotte, it's a running back that's not even on the depth chart who runs ragged on him. I do think that plays a role in kind of Ryan holding a little bit the cards close to the vest. But to answer your question, it has to be nationwide, right? It can't be one conference is doing it this way, another conference is doing it that way. These two conferences play each other, and then what? What does that mean for the bowl games? So I think if whatever it is, it has to be across the board. I'm not a favor of the Big Ten pulling the trigger and other conferences are just doing whatever. I don't like that part.
No, and let me add, and I agree with you, Tim, as far as the quarterback situation. I mean, we had the kickers, that whole situation, Frank, in Missouri, where we didn't even know in our coaches' meetings that they weren't bringing their first and second team kickers. There's paranoia that runs rampant in collegiate sports and really in sports in general, but more so, I think, now in collegiate sports and specifically collegiate football. But here you go. You have a running back that was fifth on the depth chart. He had 2 carries. But you have to tackle the guy. I don't care who's running the ball. If he was fifth string, you would think that if he was that good, they would have played the guy. They played him by necessity. He was a fifth stringer with 2 carries. Now you go out there, you need to tackle him. You know he's getting the ball. Tackle the guy. They couldn't tackle.
I mean, and to your point, that wasn't an injury situation, right? So that was just they went deep in their depth chart. The guy broke some runs, and that was that. The UAB situation was a little bit different. You warmed up a quarterback who didn't play. That was a little bit different.
Yeah, because he was on the field.
Yeah.
But they had injury. Charlotte's first couple of running backs were hurt.
The Charlotte situation, like you said, you gotta get the guy to the ground.
Tackle him. Right? Tim?
That was Bush League when they didn't say anything about the kickers until the very last second because they knew. I mean, and that happened before the UAB game.
Yeah.
But to go back to your original question, yes, they should all, everybody across the country, as you say, Frank, they should all be made to give an injury report, prior to their Saturday game, prior to the Friday game, whatever it is. That way they're all lying on an equal plane.
But also on that, like, what is that even going to mean? What is it going to look like? Because I can sit here and tell you that my 3 guys in question are a game time decision. Well, what are you going to tell me that they're not?
Well, you're going to say what the injury is. So you can't, if let's say a guy, you say, he's day to day, but he's healthy. He's ready to go. You'd put like he has an ankle or something. It's more for gambling. That's what it is. Tim hit it on the head. That's what it's for.
Give me an out. Give me a probable. Give me a game time decision. Just give me some perspective. Look, you're not going to show all your cards, but like, just don't treat me like I'm a fool. Whether I'm a sports writer, whether I'm a fan, whether I'm the broadcast people, whatever, whether I'm a gambler, just like try not to be total liars about it and just, come out and say what it is. And definitely by all means, Do not go to the NHL nonsense of upper body injury and lower body injury, because that's just
let's
stupid.
not complicate it, right?
But my thing is
No.
with the injury report, I think the game time decision is going to become the new day to day.
Yes.
Like it's
Yes.
still so like we may know what the injury is. We may know that the injury is a shoulder. But if it's still being told a game time decision, that still doesn't change the conversation that we have heading into the game of whether we know this player is going to play or not.
Sure, but the way I look at it again, if it's a running back and you end up playing the third stringer over the second stringer, that shouldn't change your defensive philosophy. You still got to get ready for all those running backs. A quarterback could be a different story because you may have a guy who's strictly a pocket passer, and then all of a sudden you're facing a multi-dimensional quarterback who runs, and you weren't prepared for him because he moved up from the fourth string to the second string. But running backs, it's a whole different ballgame. Your second string guy can't go. Here's your third string guy. Plug him in. We're running the same plays. And right now, the problem for that Memphis defense is they can't stop the run specifically, especially in the second half. For some reason, they get worn down. Okay. With that said,
wait, time out.
Okay.
It's just like, just be generally honest about it. I mean, like I used to cover NHL. They used to do stuff like say, oh, he's got a left ankle injury. Okay, why have you had your right arm in a sling for the last 3 weeks? Like, who are you trying to kid?
Yeah.
And it's the same thing with Seth Hennigan. Everybody knew he had a shoulder injury. His teammates knew it. His girlfriend knew it. The boosters knew it. Anybody who wasn't supposed to be in a practice but was in a practice knew it. Everybody and their brother knew it. Just come out and say it and just quit with the nonsense. That's my hang up.
So even though everybody could come to the conclusion with him, you knew, first of all, it wasn't structural, or he wouldn't have even been talked about as day-to-day. There would have been some news on some type of surgery, God forbid, or something like that. So you knew he was day-to-day. You knew it wasn't structural. You knew then it became pain tolerance. So again, what's it matter? I think all of us, Frank, you thought he was going to play, right?
Yeah, I wasn't.
I thought he was going to play.
I wasn't. I didn't think that we weren't going to not see Seth Hennigan on the field.
But he was banged up. So day to day, see, that one makes sense, Tim. There's other ones that don't make sense whatsoever. You want complete transparency. It sounds like complete transparency.
Yeah. I do. And I mean, here's the other part of it too. Billy Napier used to do this all the time, of course, at Florida now when he was at Louisiana. He used to say, okay, we're not going to discuss injuries. We're not going to disclose injuries. And then he'd say that like on a Monday. And then on Wednesday, he'd say, oh, yeah, his knee's coming along. just
one or the other.
About it. And then later, he actually switched later, to his credit. And he used to give like a legitimate bona fide injury report every week with, this guy, and what their injury was and what their status was. And it wasn't perfect, but it was closer to the truth, mainly because he just got called out for all the nonsense. And he kind of like threw his arms up and he was like, all right, just better, honesty is a better policy.
All right. Injuries aside, health aside, there's a game that's going to be played on Saturday. Frank, what's going to happen on Saturday?
This is probably the hardest one of the season for me. I do think it's going to be anywhere from a 3 to a 7. It's going to be a one-possession game. It's going to be a one-possession game. I think both teams are going to be scoring 35-plus points, but I genuinely don't know who's going to win.
Do you think the last team who gets the ball will win?
I do think that it may be a situation where the last team to have the ball wins the game, and the over is going to be over 60-something points.
Tim?
The Tigers are going to lose unless their defense plays absolute lights out, and it probably will come down to being whether it's a one-possession game or 10-point game or whatever, much like the Tulane game and the Missouri game, where it literally could go either way, 7 points, and either team could be capable of winning it. One does, one doesn't.
So when I go on the air on Sports 56 at 7 a.m. on Monday, if the Tigers lose this football game, that means 8 wins against teams they were favored to beat and 3 losses against teams they were favored to lose. No big W's unless you consider a Boise State win a big win when they just fired their coach and they're 5-5. What's the narrative going to be? What are people going to be saying, Frank?
People are going to say that, Memphis beat the teams that they were supposed to beat, but couldn't win any of the big games. I mean, that's going to be the knock. People are going to look at the record and say that Memphis had 3 shots to play teams that were considered big games, and they were 0-3 in those games, which is going to suck for a team that's, possibly is going to win 9 games in the regular season. But that's going to be the narrative, is that you had 3 shots at it and you couldn't get one.
But, Tim, they'll be clamoring for – some people will be clamoring for – unfortunately for the coach's head with a 9-3 season because they didn't beat anybody substantially, what's the word I'm looking for? With substance, thank you, before the end of the season. And who knows what happens in a bowl game, and nobody really cares what happens in a bowl game. What they care about is that you beat somebody of significance. That'll be the narrative, right? Yeah,
but those people are idiots. And the narrative will be that the wise guys in the desert whose existence I can neither confirm nor deny kind of know what they're doing when they pick favorites and underdogs, and which is why you're also a moron if you bet on college football.
And conversely, a W on Saturday, the way it's going to be received should be a lot of people with smiles on their face singing the praises of this team and this coach. And then, of course, you have to take care of business against Temple and get some help to get to the championship game. But that would be certainly one of the top wins for Ryan Silverfield, maybe the top. How do you feel about that? What will be the reaction Monday with a dub?
Well, there's only one question that you can ask if Memphis beats SMU, and it's like, what more do you want, like, out of the guy? Like, if you know what I mean?
Right.
That's what, 9-2, and then you have a Temple team that you expect to be 10-2. It's like, what else? What criticism can you have out of this season?
You're preaching to the choir, but that's what I hear from people. Tim, how would you answer that?
If they come away with a win, the people who are rational and open-minded will say, man, this guy's done a hell of a job. And the haters will say, yeah, well, they better not blow it against Temple. And, come back and talk to me after they win or lose in the championship game.
It's been a lot of fun. It's going to be a lot of fun on Saturday. Again, it's 11 a.m. It's an early kickoff for the Tigers and for SMU. Tim, hang in there. In a couple of seconds, we'll switch gears. We'll talk some Tigers basketball. Parth Upadhyaya will join us. In the meantime, Frank, great stuff. Make sure you read all his stories at the Daily Memphian. Of course, Tim as well, leading all the way up to this game and all the time. Check out Tigers football coverage from Frank Bonner. Thank you, Frank.
No problem. Appreciate you.
Thanks, Frank. And we'll talk later about you calling me out earlier in the podcast.
Well, Tigers football picked up a much-needed win over Charlotte and did it in dramatic fashion in overtime. The biggest win for the Tigers was on the hardwood Friday night in Columbia, Missouri, as the Memphis men's basketball team knocked off the Missouri Tigers 70-55, rallying from 14 down in the first half. And joining Tim and I now is Parth Upadhyaya. He's the Tigers basketball beat writer for your Daily Memphian. Parth, must have been a fun time for all with that great second half in Columbia as the Tigers were able to come back and win that game.
Yeah, no doubt. It was – I was at a loss for words. I'm at a loss for words now, as you can tell. They were down 14 at one point, down 7 at halftime. And, here I am typing away a story, right, that like reads as if they're going to lose. And I look up and all of a sudden, they're down 5, they're down 3, they've got the game tied. And it just kind of turned so quickly. It was astonishing.
Tim, watching it on television like I did, first half, there were a lot of issues and seemed like there was no continuity with this offense. And then all of a sudden in the second half, they're finding ways offensively. They're sharing the wealth, and the defense stepped up as well.
Yeah, you're right, Greg, that all that happened. But first of all, I need to take issue with your premise. That Charlotte win was way bigger than Memphis basketball beating Mizzou in November. And I say that not just as a Mizzou graduate, but like seriously, if like whether it's an overtime or regulation or whatever, they lose to Charlotte. Nobody cares about this SMU game on Saturday, and maybe you're writing about Ryan Silverfield's future in all of that. That was the hugest.
Well, here's why I said that.
Let me hear your logic.
Okay, look, the importance of the game, obviously the Charlotte game, because you can't get to your goals if you lose that game. The game against SMU will lack the importance of if you had beaten Charlotte, right? So I know the importance of that game. But they played Charlotte. They are a 3-win team in the conference. Nobody is really giving them credit because they won over Charlotte. But people are going bonkers because Memphis basketball beat a very good SEC team, albeit just the second game of the year. That's why I'm saying it was a bigger win. I'm not saying it's a more important win. I'm saying it's a bigger win. A Memphis basketball win over Missouri is bigger than a Memphis win over Charlotte when you take everything else out of consideration. That's what I'm saying.
Charlotte plays in the NFL, right?
They're the Carolina Panthers. Come on, Tim. But that's where I was going with this. I don't want to take away from either.
All right. I'll concede that.
Yeah.
To your point, they figured out a lot of things. One of them was dump the ball into Jordan Brown, since like Missouri doesn't have anybody like taller than 5'7" on the floor, and you're going to probably be pretty effective. Shorten the bench, share the ball a little more. They did kind of flip a light switch. I did not think, for all the hype that I heard about how good Missouri was going to be as an SEC team this season, I thought Missouri played like pretty poorly. Nick Hero wasn't impressive necessarily. Mm-hmm. They just didn't seem to have a lot of flow in their offense. But regardless of all that, it was a super win for the Tigers, especially with Penny Hardaway watching from Harpo's or Fieldhouse or whichever other Columbia establishment he may have chosen to watch the game from, since he was not allowed in the arena.
You wanted to say a different word than poorly, didn't you?
There was that pause.
There was a pause, yes. He was like, okay, I better be G-rated over here. All right, Javon Quinterly. This is the Javon Quinterly that we expect to see, a leader out there, a guy who took control of the game. Obviously, in the exhibition season, 2 games, he only played one of them. It's hard to figure out, right? They're playing, they're having fun, they're going through the motions. The first game in their win against Jackson State, we saw some decent things, but this was a game where you go, yeah, that's why Penny brought in Javon Quinterly.
No, absolutely. And even, the exhibitions aside, even the game against Jackson State, I believe he had 4 turnovers. He combined for 14 points and 7 turnovers in the 2 games that we had seen him play. That's the exhibition against Lemoyne-Owen and the opener against Jackson State. And man, like that second half, he looked like he was back, looked like Jelly Fam JQ, as they used to call him, But
it's not just the production, Parth, it's the leadership. And
Absolutely.
Tim, that's what they need. Obviously, last year you had 2 leaders. You had DeAndre Williams and Kendrick Davis. They were also the go-to players. We're trying to figure out who will be the leader on a team that's basically consists of all new people. Jaden Hardaway is coming off the bench, and he's one of the returnees, and the other is Malco. You're not going to give the keys to the van for Malco to be the leader of the team. So who's going to step up? I thought Quinterly took a major step towards being that guy.
And I think that's even more important this year than last year, because last year they brought in Kendrick Davis to do that. And for as much as DeAndre Williams, was proficient, he also, had his issues, the foul troubles, the frustrations and all that. Kendrick Davis was needed to be and was the obvious and clear leader. This season, you got a whole bunch of big names, and without knowing any of them individually, I'm guessing a whole bunch of egos, whole bunch of guys, wanting attention. And it could be any one of them, but it takes one to kind of step up and say, I'm going to be the one and make sure that it gets done with no issues. And it seems so far that Quinterly is doing that. And on top of that, I love the way he pushes the pace, and I love the way how he seems to have a feel for, I'm going to be a distributor. I'm going to be a scorer. We need to move the ball around. I need to take the ball more to the basket. He has a feel for how he's needed, and he also has a feel for, it seems like, how teammates need him.
Yeah.
John Stockton used to talk, once in a while when I was covering the Utah Jazz, about one of the most important things for a point guard is to know your customer. If he's on a fast break 3-on-1 and he's got Karl Malone on one side and Scott Padgett on the other side, everybody thinks he's going to just dish it off to Malone for a little dunk.
Mm-hmm.
He might give it to Scott Padgett because he knows Scott Padgett needs it for like head reasons and, for confidence reasons. The kid needs something to get himself going. It doesn't matter whether Karl Malone has another 2 points or not, in a situation like that. You got to know your customer. And Quinterly seems like a point guard who knows his customer.
Hey, Karl Malone knew his customers as well. He was a mailman, for goodness sakes. He had to know his customers. All right, so the starting lineup has been a topic of debate, and I don't know why. It's a small sample size. They're 2 for 2. It really doesn't matter, and Coach Stansbury or Coach Hardaway will tell you it doesn't matter who starts, it's who finishes.
Right.
But there are some people to say they got to a slow start against Jackson State. They got off to a really slow start against Mizzou. They got Malco in the starting lineup. What are you waiting for? Put Jordan Brown in the starting lineup and make sure Caleb Mills is in the starting lineup. Does it matter, Parth, who starts this game?
I think it's going to matter, right? Like a team, like when you're playing against a team like Michigan, or if you get, Arkansas, North Carolina, Villanova in the battle for Atlantis, you want to put your best 5 out there, right? To set the tone for that game, set the energy, like you just said. On the flip side of that, do I think it's Malco's fault? Do I think it's Nick Jourdain's fault that they kind of got off to a slow start? Not necessarily. But I think the biggest thing that we saw in terms of adjustments for the game was the second half. They went small. They took Nick Jourdain off the floor and they put Caleb Mills back in. They left Malco there as the lone big instead of Jordan Brown. But, with those kind of 4 guard/wings, they were able to cover more ground defensively. They were able to move laterally quicker, stop dribble penetration. I think that was key. So when you're talking about starting, I think you want to go not only to your best 5 players, but you want to go small, which lucky enough for them, happens to be their best 5 players, right? For those guys are going to be either guards or wings.
Well, again, it's situational basketball. Sometimes you want to go small. Sometimes you want to go big,
right,
if you could take advantage of it. Tim, what's also interesting is that Rick Stansbury, in his second of 3 games as the interim head coach, longtime head coach, as everybody knows, at Mississippi State and Western Kentucky, shortened the rotation in the second half. And people are wondering, well, will Penny do that when he returns? He's more apt to play 10, 11 guys. Now, this is something maybe they discussed together, because I don't think Stansbury was going to ad-lib too much. It's a game plan that Penny has put together, but they had success by limiting who was out on the floor in that second half.
Yeah, I think Penny, even though Stansbury's in his first season in Memphis, I think Penny really respects his head coaching experience. And so, while they may have discussed approaches and kind of general theories, I think he trusted him enough to let him make, decisions within the flow of the game. And Stansbury, I thought, did a terrific job about, in that regard. He's known as, the recruiter and the guys who can magically make guys eligible and all that kind of stuff. But I thought he was a terrific on the floor coach. And I frankly think that there were some things that Penny could have, and maybe, sometimes it's helpful, maybe not ideally at the beginning of a season, maybe like a little later in non-conference play, but I think it's helpful for a head coach to maybe even be forced to step away for a couple games and just kind of like watch as an outsider and see how somebody else who you trust kind of handles the team, just to give you some other things to think about. So maybe Penny benefits from all this a little bit. I also think that especially, and you mentioned a little bit there, Greg, especially in college basketball, it's all about matchups. And when you have as much talent as it appears this Memphis team does, when the bench is as deep as it is, you can afford to be a little bit more creative in how you play around with your lineups and how you might have a different starting lineup when you go with the bigger matchups, or you play your better, smaller one, or you realize you need to get some bench, scoring going, or if you're in a situation like last season where you need to protect somebody with the fouls with DeAndre Williams and buy him a little bit at the time. I hate to go back to the Jazz again, but I will. Jerry Sloan, he used to start guys like, again, I bring his name back, Scott Padgett or Quincy Lewis, and you're going, what? But it made sense. It's like, where can I hide a guy? Where can I buy a few minutes from a guy if I don't have a particularly deep bench? And Jerry's favorite line is, and I guarantee he's not alone in this. And look, it goes back to egos. Guys want to hear their name called. Guys want to be the one, running out and doing the dance and all that and have the TV cameras on them before the game. But Jerry used to say all the time, it doesn't matter who starts. It matters who finishes.
Parth, after the game, what were the players? I'm sure they were excited about the win, but what were they saying about the potential of this team?
Yeah, I think it was two things that kind of lead to your answer about what they think they can be right one day. And one is kind of broad, but them sticking together, and that's something that I was surprised a little bit by too. Tim mentioned all these big names coming from schools where they were the alphas, right? Either 1A or 1B, heck, even 1C for some of them. But that's still, a significant role compared to having to kind of fill in gaps, right, with this team. But when they were down 14 with whatever it was, 7 minutes left in that first half, they didn't, at least from my vantage point, they didn't point fingers, they didn't bicker, they didn't argue. They stuck together and, dug themselves out of that hole. So that was number one. Number two is the defensive switch that they flipped, right? Which happens to be, obviously going small, putting Caleb Mills on Sean East, who didn't get a shot off, man. Sean East didn't get a single shot off for scoring 14 points. I didn't know Mills was that good
defensively.
I didn't know either. I thought Jalen Young was their ball stopper, but now they've apparently got two that we can tell. But I think those are the two things that they marveled at the most. In particular, Jordan Brown was looking at the stat sheet when me and other reporters were in the hallway talking to him and JQ, and he looked at the switch between Mizzou shooting upwards of 40% in the first half, and then second half 19.2%, and his eyes got big. He's like, oh my gosh, and then obviously we asked him about it and that kind of thing. But I think it was those two things that showed them their own potential. Obviously, the scoring, as JQ said, will just come. They've got guys who get buckets, so that's something that they don't want to, I guess, over focus on, harp on. Mm-hmm. But if they can get this defensive thing right, man, this team can be really good.
I've been wondering about the first time they face adversity, what will happen. I don't know if that counts, Tim, being down 14 on the road at Missouri. Maybe that counts as the first time they faced adversity. But if it is, they passed with flying colors.
They did. I mean, I don't know if it counts either, being so early in the season, being early in the scope of the game and having plenty of time to kind of claw yourself back. But it's a nice little early season test to have, especially when you're facing the kind of competition that they will between now and Christmas time.
All right, so Friday night they'll play Alabama State. That's Tony Madlock, former teammate of Penny Hardaway. I don't think anybody expects that to be too much of a problem for Memphis. And then they head to the Bahamas. And we'll talk more about that next week. Of course, I'm not sure of Parth's travel schedule and all that, but
flying out Tuesday.
You're flying out Tuesday. Yeah. We'll do the podcast Tuesday. So Tim will certainly give us his perspective on what to expect. So since we have you now,
wait, time out.
You want to go? You want to go? Is that what you're saying?
Parth sticks around for the
You want to go?
Just throwing it out.
Weren't you just in Italy, for goodness sakes? Let the kid go to the Bahamas, all right?
Yeah, and it's no coincidence that I was in Italy and Iceland, and Mount Etna has erupted, and Iceland basically had like 1,200 earthquakes in the last 48 hours and is waiting for one of those volcanoes to erupt.
Yeah, I saw that with Mount Etna. And I thought, what did Buckley do there, man? What did he do? He caused havoc there. All right, so the expectations. Michigan, the other night, they rolled over Rick Pitino, St. John's Johnnies, the Red Storm. They're not the Red Men anymore. It could be a chance to really elevate this team that right now is on just barely on the outside of the top 25, moving up, enough votes to be number 26. Michigan, and then who knows what will happen, but we know it's a star-studded field. What are your expectations for next week?
Yeah, I think 2-1 after what we've seen from this team so far is totally reasonable. Obviously, if you come out of there winning the dang thing, then you're talking about perhaps a top 15 team coming out of that, at least going to Ole Miss as a top 15 team in early December. But man, if they can get 2 here with the field that we see, that includes Michigan, Arkansas, North Carolina, Villanova, and then even the teams at the bottom half of that, being Stanford, Texas Tech, those are quality opponents as well. The only one you probably don't want to draw is Northern Iowa, right? Which is the only team among that group that sits outside the top 100 in KenPom. So that's not going to do much for you, if you beat Northern Iowa in the Bahamas on a neutral court. But man, if you can beat Michigan, right, past that first test and then face Arkansas, and have a shot at a team of that caliber, man, I think that's huge.
Tim, as we say goodbye, should Tigers fans be really excited? Should they settle down after that win over Missouri? How should they look at this team right now, early going in the season?
Oh, I would think with incredibly high expectations. I think Penny Hardaway knows that. I mean, he recruited a team that on paper is capable of making a deep run. And 2 games in, they've showed that they're nothing short of that. We'll know more after Parth returns from his Caribbean vacation. But yeah, very high expectations.
Tim,
his second Caribbean vacation, I may add, in this calendar year after, sipping Mai Tais in the Dominican.
That's right.
In just 4 months, back to the islands.
That's right. You're back to the islands. Good for you. Tim, thank you so much for joining us. We'll talk to you next week, hopefully right here in studio.
Take care, guys.
That is Tim Buckley and Parth. Safe travels. We'll talk to you when you get back. As Tim said, we'll have a lot to talk about, and we'll see where the Tigers are after their game against Alabama State and obviously the tournament, the Atlantis tournament down at the Bahamas. Have a safe trip.
For sure. Looking forward to it as always.
All right. Want to thank Frank Bonner and Parth, Upadhyaya, and Tim Buckley for joining us. Be sure to check out our other podcast, the Daily Memphians Food Podcast, Sound Bites. It's hosted by Chris Harrington and Holly Whitfield. The Sidebar with Eric Barnes is about arts, culture, and everything in between. And the Grizzlies Podcast, also hosted by Chris Harrington with Drew Hill. All of our podcasts are available on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you find podcasts. We'll talk to you next time.